Shalom and welcome to another episode in our ongoing series called Faith Journeys with God in the Land. Today, we've hiked to the synagogue at the ancient site of Gamla in the Golan Heights. Well, we are at the synagogue at Gamla. Gamla is a very Jewish city. It actually dates before the time of Jesus, from the Hellenistic period, 2nd and 1st century BC, and into, of course, the 1st century AD. It was a Jewish site, well populated, and eventually destroyed by the Romans in 67 AD as a part of the First Revolt. Now, we've already hiked down from the top. You see that hill behind me. That's the top of Gamla, and there's let's just say a challenging trail that leads us all the way down here. So what we're going to do is take our final steps into the synagogue that you see the walls, the outer walls of this structure. This is one of maybe 7 or 8 first century synagogues in the land of Israel. Now, right outside this synagogue is a ritual bath called a mikveh. In fact, let's peek into this ritual bath. And there you can see behind me, this is where purification took place before people entered the synagogue itself. Now, the big question is, did Jesus teach from this synagogue? Let's go and talk about this in this episode of our series. I'm going to walk in backwards so that you can actually see the synagogue. This is the opening of the synagogue. It faces towards the lake, but a first century synagogue, rectangular in structure, and quite impressive. This is original. Yet the question is, did Jesus teach from here? Now, we do know from Matthew 9 and even Matthew 4, when he called his first 4 disciples, the fishermen, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. But in chapter 9, it also says that he taught in many of the synagogues in the Galilee. So why not this one? Now, Gamla is located 6 miles due east of the northern tip of the Sea of Galilee, which means I have to think, even though the eastern side of the lake was inhabited primarily by Gentiles, for instance, the cities of the Decapolis, with the exception of Beit Shan on the west side, were all on the east side. But this synagogue, being so close to Beit Saida, just 6 miles away to the west, Chorazin, Capernaum, why not this one when we read about Jesus teaching in the synagogues of the Galilee? Now, I have to think that it's quite a special experience to be literally where Jesus most likely was. Now, right there in the middle of that synagogue, can you picture Jesus teaching about the kingdom? In fact, that's what he did. His go-to message when he taught in the villages and the towns of the lower and upper Galilee was about this kingdom that's defined in Matthew 5 as the Malchut Shemaim, a Hebrew phrase, which means the kingdom of heaven. So when we can sit here on these benches of the synagogue or see these pillars that are in the shape of a heart, as you see, I can picture Jesus standing right where I am at, and with all the people sitting on these benches, listening intently to what he was going to share. Perhaps this was here where he would, as he did in Nazareth, remember in Luke 4, he is handed the scroll of the prophet, and it was his prerogative to read whatever passage that he wanted to, So he reads in that context from a passage that we know as Isaiah 61. But perhaps here, with all the people, you can picture them. They're seated on these benches. Maybe 100, 120 could fit in this synagogue, maybe a little more. But Jesus then sits down, most likely, as a few times we read about in the Gospels. Sitting down was a sign of smeka, authority. And then he, no doubt, shared about the kingdom, this Malchut Shemaim. Now, in the understanding of a first century audience, they would have understood that this kingdom was all about one thing: the reign and rule of God in people's lives. Now, certainly there were a number of Jewish people, communities, who were looking for a politically oriented Messiah. In fact, there's even extra-biblical accounts of those who were gathering a following, if you will, looking for a Messiah that Jesus was not. Namely, Jesus was not about defeating the Romans or dealing with the oppression of the Romans, but he was talking about and came for the purpose of redemption. He came to be a spiritual Messiah. So when we talk about the Malchut Shemaim, he was all about teaching, in inviting people to allow the reign and rule of God in their lives, to accept him as the spiritual Messiah, as the fulfillment of prophetic word. And then when they heard him in synagogues like this, they would have perhaps said, this is the guy who we're looking for. In fact, the crowds gathered in mass to hear him. Maybe people who were curious to hear what he was teaching about. But when he taught about the kingdom, I think they knew exactly why he came. He came to be the spiritual Messiah, to usher in the kingdom of heaven, the Malchut Shemaim. In this life lesson, I hope that we understand the importance of the kingdom in our lives. We've talked about the kingdom in other locations, of course. But when we talk about the kingdom, standing in a synagogue that most likely Jesus was here teaching about the same topic, I hope that we're inspired to allow the reign and rule of God in our lives. And we can do that through the power of the Holy Spirit, as the Spirit reigns in us and inspires us and indwells in us. So from Gamla, the synagogue here in the Golan Heights, we celebrate Jesus, his ministry, and the kingdom message. We are a part of his kingdom that has now come to reign and rule in our lives. So be encouraged to allow the kingdom to reign in your life today. And until next time, shalom.